Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Foxhole
Hi.
with George App.
Yeah. Nice
Hey,
seeing you.
John. Nice to see you too. I'm going to give everybody an update on the Cosmic Summit, and then I'm going to introduce our guests here, Mr. Chandra Wickramasinghe and Mr. Becket Fusik. Updates on the summit is, as you know, we got roughly, I think 100, don't have 100 now, but some number of tickets under 100 available for the Atlantean Pass, which is going to come with all the VIP stuff that we're gathering together, some of it to be named in the future. But if you get in now as one of the first 100 people, you're going to get priority seating and a number of other benefits. The tickets are selling pretty well, so you might want to get them now. And we're going to be giving a big advertising campaign relatively soon, and they should sell a heck of a lot better. So, again, it's in your interest to get a ticket now, and very much appreciate your attendance. So, today I have with me a great friend and a distinguished scientist. And the great friend is Becket Fusik. And y'all might not know Becket directly, but you've been seeing his work if you've been seeing anything that has to do with the Cosmic Summit, because he is our marketing manager, for the lack of a better word, and soon to be my partner in the venture. And we're also working on some other things and made fast friends a year ago. And Becket is an enlightened individual, also very technically competent and very interested in these subjects. And I asked him to join Dr. Wickramasinghe and I, just to be kind of somebody new to the subject that's interested in these kind of things, maybe a lot like the audience, because Chandra and I have been studying this. I've been studying it for 15 years. He's been studying it for 60. And sometimes we can kind of get off and forget to give some of the basics. And we want to, share a fairly newcomer level information. And maybe Becket can help there and ask some good questions if I missed something. But our guest today, ladies and gentlemen, is, as I say, an old friend of mine who I had the good fortune to get to know about 10 years ago. And I'm honored today to welcome a monumental figure in the world of astrobiology and cosmology, Dr. Chandra Wickramasinghe. Hello, Chandra.
Thank you. Hello. Nice to be with you.
Chandra great to have you, buddy. Chandra's been at the forefront of a captivating theory that has both challenged and broadened our understanding of life's origins. Chandra and the late Sir Fred Hoyle, regarded as the 20th century's greatest British scientists, became known, among other things, for their pioneering work in the field of panspermia, the idea that life exists throughout the universe and is spread by comets and meteoroids, a favorite subject of us here at the Foxhole. For decades, Dr. Wickramasinghe has remained steadfast in his pursuit of the evidence that supports his theory that the universe is littered with microbes. Wickramasinghe studied at the Colombo University, Sri Lanka, where he graduated in 1960 with a Bachelor of Science first-class honors in mathematics, and was awarded a Commonwealth Scholarship by the Queen to attend Cambridge University in order to further his studies. As a young man of 20, he set off in a steamship. Is that correct, Chandra? That's the way I remember your...
That was the only way you could travel around the world. If you're very, very rich, you can go by with a ship.
So he set off on a steamship from Colombo to England and then on to Cambridge, where he obtained his PhD and his scientific doctorate under the mentorship of Fred Hoyle. Following his education, Wickramasinghe was a fellow of Jesus College, Cambridge from 1963 to 1973, when he did a tremendous amount of groundbreaking work with Hoyle, and then became professor of applied mathematics and astronomy at University College, Cardiff, where he served with distinguishment for many decades. Dr. Wickramasinghe is not just a theorist. He has also been involved in experiments that analyze cosmic dust and cometary material, looking for the entombed, desiccated, and freeze-dried seeds of life. And I'm not talking the building blocks of life we hear endlessly in talks of cosmic biology, but the actual life forms themselves, not the building blocks. The actual life forms themselves, which he has identified basically in cold storage in cometary material. His work has not been without controversy. Traditional paradigms in science were shaken when Dr. Wickramasinghe proposed that many diseases, including pandemics, could possibly have extraterrestrial origin. Yet he has remained undeterred, always guided by a deep sense of curiosity and a commitment to scientific rigor. A prolific writer with more than 20 books, hundreds of research papers to his name, including 75 papers in Nature with Fred Hoyle, none of which were adequately refuted on this very subject. Dr. Wickramasinghe's ideas have served as a beacon, inviting us to look up and wonder about our place in the cosmos and how interconnected life truly is. I should note and give congratulations to Chandra for being appointed in 2022 by Queen Elizabeth, shortly before her death, as a member of the Order of the British Empire. So, dear listeners, as we delve deep into the mysteries of life beyond Earth, let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Chandra Wickramasinghe, a man who embodies the spirit of exploration and discovery. Welcome to the Foxhole, Dr. Wickramasinghe.
Thank you very much. Very flattering remarks. And I hope I can live up to those.
Well, I'm sure you will, and I'm just thrilled. And I'll note, kind of as a little bit of Foxhole trivia, that when I started playing with the idea of doing a podcast, even before I met Becket, I believe, I just wanted to record a conversation with somebody and thought it'd be cool to put it on YouTube and just see if I could do this kind of stuff. And we did that. Remember that, Chandra, a little bit more than a year ago?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
we did another one, and I called it. Yeah. And I called it a podcast then. The difference was absolutely nobody was watching, and it was horribly produced.
Yeah.
So basically,
this is very professional. I mean, you gotta.
Yeah. We're trying. Yeah. Except maybe the awkward long intros might need some work. So it's good to kind of have another talk with you in what's going to be probably a more popular and viewed setting out there.
Okay.
So
great.
We're talking with them. Yeah.
Yeah,
and go ahead, tell us a little bit what comes to mind about your own background that you want to share, or anything else you want to begin the conversation with, sir.
Well, I think well, you made all those points in the introduction. I was born in a country that was basically largely a Buddhist country, and they had Buddhism has a much more open mind on the nature of the universe and the age of the universe and our place in the universe. I mean, we humans and all life are a trivial component of the cosmos, according to ancient Vedic, Hindu, Buddhist traditions, right? Whereas in Christendom, in the Western world, I think man and humans are the center of creation, and so there's a sort of ego-human centricism that pervades Western science, and there's a denial of that pervades the Orient. And so, I mean, that may have, whether that had an influence on me, I cannot really be absolutely confident. But I think those were the sort of underlying beliefs that prevailed in the country that I grew up in. Anyway, I think the other sort of strong incentive for me for pursuing this career that I embarked on was the fact that my father, who was born in 1909, was this very distinguished scholar in Cambridge. He went to Cambridge in 1927. He got the highest honors in the mathematical tripos. He was a student of Sir Arthur Eddington, who was, at the time, he was a great proponent of Einstein's theory of relativity. So he has written letters about my father being a very good student and so on. So this was the backdrop, and in the house that I grew up in our home, we had lots of books on astronomy and so on. So, and lots of conversations that I had with my father, and so that was a good start. I think that perhaps was the beginning of my sort of strong professional interest in moving towards mathematics, science, and eventually astronomy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so you began as in Colombo. You were a mathematics student, and then went to Cambridge and studied astronomy. Is that how it went?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in the mathematics curriculum in Sri Lanka, in most universities at the time, there was a component of astronomy. I mean, not astrophysics, but I mean, component of study and sort of calculating the positions of stars at different times of the year and so on. So there was some component of astronomy. But another event that really sort of tripped me into astronomy was a total solar eclipse that happened and was visible in Sri Lanka in I think it was 1956, right, or 55, 56. And this was such an important event scientifically that a whole load of scientists from all over the world, from England, from Japan, from the US, and so on, converged on Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka was for a week or two, the focus of all of this intense astronomical activity connected with a total solar eclipse. And I should tell you that the total solar eclipse is very, still is interesting for astronomy. And at the time, it was very interesting because there was the project that was, I think it was masterminded by Eddington, to try to prove Einstein's theory of relativity, which told us that light is bent when it passes very close to a heavy, huge object like a star or a black hole or whatever it is. So this was the attempt that was made at the solar eclipse. The attempt was foiled and failed, however, because it turned out to be a very cloudy day. There was no eclipse. It was just darkness. So it was but the run up to this event had lots of discussions in the popular media at the time, and so that I think that sort of played a tiny bit of a role. And the next sort of event that was sort of quite directly related was that I picked up in a local bookstore a very slim volume of lectures by Fred Hoyle, lectures that he gave on the radio. It was called The Nature of the Universe, and I read that. And I read that about 4 years before I ever thought of going to Cambridge. And so it was quite a remarkable coincidence that I arrived in Cambridge and then go.
Let me stop you there for just a second. Tell us about the scholarship that you received. It's called an Empire Scholarship, and how did they select?
Yeah, it was called. Ceylon, Sri Lanka. Ceylon, it was a British colony until 1948, right? In 1948, it became an independent Commonwealth country. It was still regarded as being part of the former empire, and it was called the Commonwealth of the Empire, of the British Empire. So,
Commonwealth Scholarship. Okay.
Commonwealth Scholarship. So Ceylon was part of the Commonwealth of Great Britain. And so as a matter of patronage, I suppose, to a poorer country, the government in the UK offered scholarships every year to the best 2 or 3 students to go to universities in Cambridge. And it doesn't have to be Cambridge, universities in the UK. So I took this opportunity and I applied for one, and I was selected, interviewed by people in London and so on. And I was selected to...
I don't want to embarrass you, but does that suggest you were one of the most intelligent young men identified in the entire British Commonwealth?
In Sri Lanka, certainly. In the British Commonwealth, I don't know.
Yeah.
That would be too much to claim.
Well, if they pick some from each country, so it's fair enough to say.
Yeah.
But so 1 or 2 would go each year. And that is kind of a little bit patronizing, but it's also kind of cool.
Yeah. This was
and then
assuaging the guilt of the colonizing country that had sort of maybe exploited these poorer countries for centuries.
Well, I guess you got some of the good out of it, and that came with a good English education. And who was that education given to you from? Describe Sir Fred Hoyle, and you've written a wonderful book about his life and your relationship with Fred that I remember I read I don't remember where I was going, but it was a transatlantic journey, and I read the whole book by the time I got over there, and it was terrific. Memories of Fred, wasn't it? I'm sorry, what's the name of that book?
I think it was...
You've written 20 books. So.
My Journey with Fred Hoyle was the title.
My Journey with Fred Hoyle.
Yeah. I mean,
it was a delightful book.
Yeah, the University of I wanted to do astronomy, theoretical astronomy, and that was the sort of box that I ticked when I applied to be admitted to university, right? So I didn't know at that stage that I would be assigned, that Fred Hoyle would be assigned as my supervisor, as my mentor. And it was quite it's a stroke of luck that it ended up that way. So I arrived in Cambridge on a bleak autumn day in 1960. And then he used to see most of his students in his house. He wasn't a guy who enjoyed going to his office. So I went to his house, and as a really timid young man. And then I really thought that I could strike up a very close intellectual relationship with this man, because he started off by saying that you write poetry. And I did write poetry, and I do write poetry. And he sort of quizzed me on some of the great English poets, the Romantics, and so on. And he was also a very, very strongly, literally sort of tuned to English literature, right? So and he writes beautifully. I mean, those books that he's written are really superbly easy to read, and they're very, very nice style he had. So anyway, so we struck up a good relationship, and then we started working on various problems, and finally, the problem that's really interested both me and him was the question of how life originated. And that didn't come all of a sudden.
That's a big question for a young man.
Yeah, it was a big question for a young man. For me, in fact, it was a tremendous question, but it didn't come all at once. The first project that I was put on, essentially, or encouraged to start upon, was to investigate, to find out what the cosmic dust in space was made of. Right? Astronomers had known for pretty close to a century that there were vast clouds of dust between the stars. If you look at the Milky Way on a dark, clear night, you see a band of stars stretching from horizon to horizon. And in between those stars, you see sort of black patches, dark patches, various shapes, and so on. And these are thick, dense clouds of cosmic dust, or interstellar dust. And astronomers really were puzzled as to what this dust was made of. There were many ideas that were floating around at the time, but none of those ideas were really secure in terms of absolute proof. So we really didn't. In 1960, we had no idea that what the dust was made of. The fashionable point of view was that it was made of ice particles, like water ice that you see in the clouds of the Earth's atmosphere, right? If you look at the clouds in the sky, you see these white cumulus clouds, and they're made of trillions and trillions of microscopic ice particles. So astronomers thought that the dust in space was just like that. And so I began to explore that possibility, to do all the calculations, compare calculations with the data that was available, and so on. And I came very quickly to the conclusion that the ice grain theory was fundamentally flawed. The dust was not water ice. And then the alternative that I discovered was much better alternative, was that it was made mainly of the element carbon. Right? So we published papers on that. These papers were vigorously contested by all our enemies in astronomy. Right? They said that it's ice, it cannot be carbon, and so on. So this went on for about this kind of refutation and fights between me and the establishment went on for about 5 years. But then suddenly there were new observations, astronomical observations, that were pointing in the direction of carbon. So carbon grains in space became more or less the orthodoxy in the late 1960s, right? I struggled to get it even heard as a possibility. But by the end of the 60s, people said, "Oh, it is just black particles of soot that come out of a flame. These are particles that come out of stars, and they are all these pictures that you see here. All this, the Horsehead's Nebula, the third from the bottom, and all these very dark, and the James Webb Telescope images of dust clouds. These are the clouds that I began to work on, the dust that is in those clouds. And as I said, it was thought to be ice, and then I demolished that idea that it was ice, proposed that it was carbon, and for about 10 years that was argued and disputed, but then people said, yes, carbon must be the main component. So people agreed with that, but I wasn't absolutely happy with the details of the various astronomical data that related to this dust, it didn't absolutely fit perfectly the carbon soot type of model. And I was beginning in the 1970s to wonder whether the carbon was in the form of organic polymers, like what they now call the building blocks of life, the chemical building blocks of life, right? So we proposed
that term drives me crazy, by the way, but we'll talk about that down the road. But everybody note that the building blocks of life that you hear so often about in astrobiology, the building blocks. But go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, that's nonsense. I mean, the building blocks of life are just large molecules that involve carbon. I mean, not that large. We can contain 10 atoms. Nothing to do with life. But the belief now is that these molecules are everywhere in space, just as I had it in the late 1960s. This is my point of view in the late 1960s. We wrote papers in Nature. They were sometimes refuted, but most often they were accepted as being the correct idea. There were these chemicals that could perhaps be the start of life, right? Organic chemicals. So I flirted with that wrong idea, which now people, every single scientist who looks at an asteroid and finds these molecules think that they've discovered the building blocks of life. But these are not the building blocks of life that I know for sure now. Because by the late 1970s, early 1980s, I was collaborating with a whole lot of astronomers, including my brother, who was a really frontline astronomer in Australia, with access to the best telescopes, Anglo-Australian telescope and so on. So we studied the dust much, much more carefully, using the best techniques of infrared astronomy and so forth. We made the prediction that if this was not living material, or if the dust was bacteria, freeze-dried bacteria, we would expect a certain signature to be found in astronomy, right? In other words, if the dust, that all these dark clouds that we were seeing now from James Webb Telescope and from all the powerful telescopes, if these dark patches are made mostly of bacteria, dead or alive or partially dead, right, or desiccated, and so on, there should be a signature.
Hold on. Drop the mic.
Yeah.
Becket, what did you hear him say?
That these clouds are potentially mostly made up of bacteria.
Do you want to start with the first question?
Matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So how is it that you were discovering and proving that it was bacteria at the time?
No, we weren't at the beginning. We weren't discovering this, but the question that's really puzzled me, finding the signatures of organic molecules in the dust. Right. For about 10 years, we found these all over the place, and we published papers in Nature saying that aromatic double ring molecules, long chain polymers of organics, and so on, exist in space, and this is what the dust is made of. But it didn't originally, to me, it didn't occur to me to ask the question, but how could such vast quantities of organic material be sort of all over the place in space, from our galaxy to the most distant external galaxies? They all had the same signatures of so-called organic molecules that nowadays people call the building blocks of life, right? So this was happening too often for me. And I wondered how they are related to life, how these molecules could be related to life. And it was at that point in my career that I began to study or read biology books, which tell you that on their first page, every biology book tells you that there was a primordial soup on the earth, right? Long time ago, 4.5 billion years ago.
In a warm pond.
A warm pond, organic building blocks of life, simple chemicals got together there. And
right here.
On Earth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whole wide universe, but we assume it was right here, that pond.
Right here. And that's the belief that has been really it's been stuck in science for certainly for a century, and this is something that is woefully despicable in terms of science, because against all the facts that are now emerging, that's idea cannot be true, right?
Mm-hmm.
The requirement for a living system to emerge requires these so-called building blocks to be arranged in very, very specific arrangements, like the proteins, the enzyme, DNA, and so on. And if you were to work out the probability that the so-called building blocks of life end up with a living system, that probability is zilch, is zero. And we've made many comparisons. We've said that it's like saying that if you have lots of building blocks, organic building blocks, in an ocean, to say that it could ever turn into a sort of replicable living system is like saying a tornado blowing through a junkyard can assemble a fully working Boeing 747. Those are the aircraft that were around those days. So, I mean, just imagine
An amazing series of coincidences that result in chaos ordering into complexity.
Absolutely.
Just by happenstance.
Yeah. Complexity was ignored in this whole story by the mainstream astronomers, and they still continue to be ignored. Now about 50 years have passed since they were doing experiments to try to prove this in the lab, to prove that the building blocks of life could turn into something very simple in terms of living system, and it's been a woeful lack of success that we have seen over 50 or 60 years, using the best laboratories, all of the best techniques in biology and chemistry. It's not shown, it's not happened, and the reason is very simple, right? You're asking for a miracle, and miracles do not happen.
So if these
really
aren't the building,
George and Becket, is that now about 3 weeks ago, astronomers discovered a biomolecule in an exoplanet that was about 200 light years away from the Earth, from our solar system. Light takes 200.
I missed that.
Okay, you missed that. It was in the news. It was news for a while, and what they say there is that this molecule that they've discovered, called methyl disulfide, in the atmosphere of that exoplanet, and combined with methane and ammonia also, methane and carbon dioxide, must mean that there is life on that planet, right? Because the carbon disulfide, methyl disulfide on the Earth is only produced, seems to be, by biology. Bacteria in the oceans produce that. So, I mean, they're very ready now to say that there is life on this other planet, which then they go on to say has to arise spontaneously, just as life arose on the Earth spontaneously. So one miracle has been doubled at the present time with the new data from the James Webb Telescope. Okay, so I think it's getting more and more bizarre. The defense, or the desire to defend, the ailing theory of spontaneous generation. This is really getting me down. That's many times in the day, because I think human beings are rational creatures. It's my belief that we are rational. We can think rationally. So why do we not use logic to discriminate between what is truly false and what is truly right? I don't understand it. I think there's some deep religious obstacle, a religious type obstacle that we have in the scientific community, particularly, to discount any evidence that says that life is everywhere and that life is maybe eternal in the cosmos. Right? This is something that is alien to our culture, our scientific culture, and I think also importantly, it's alien to Judaic religion. And I hate to bring religion into it with all the modern religious conflicts that we have in the world today. But I think it has a part to play in the.
Do you feel like you're back, like the growing up in Sri Lanka and where you're from, gave you the open mind to be able to explore this theory and all of the work that you've done?
Was that? Yeah, I think
Is
that.
that pivotal?
Yeah, if I was brought up exclusively in my youth in a Eurocentric European culture, which says that the universe is that the Earth is the center of everything. In many ways, we believe that the Earth is more important than any other planetary body in the universe. That we believe also that humans are more important than any other living creatures on the Earth and living creatures throughout the universe. I think that belief is implicit. I mean, we don't like to admit it in those terms, but I think it's implicit in our deep sort of psychology that we have. So I think that there is some pseudo or semi-religious obstacle that we have to face to ditch the wrong theory.
I've got a blower creeping up on my podcast studio here, a leaf blower. So I'm going to mute the mic, and Becket, you take it for a minute. Let me go see whether I can calm this down.
Yeah. No problem. So I have a question about, this is me looking at this very much like a novice, but when you say they've found life in a very, very distant planet, galaxy, what form is that in? Like, how can I visualize this, or how can I think about this, or people who are not familiar with what that may be?
I think what they have found in the last several weeks, I think the most recent discovery is evidence for microbial life, for microscopic life forms like bacteria in the oceans of a distant planet, right? Planet that is 200 light years away from the Earth. That is not a big deal in terms of life, and as far as we know it, we need to find evidence of animals and plants and animals and eventually intelligent creatures like ourselves. But finding evidence for them is more difficult, I think. Right? We're finding evidence for intelligent creatures requires much more a closer analysis of the planet's surface. We need to maybe land on the planet's surface and see whether there's activity. But evidence of the chemicals that are released by microorganisms, right? Because microorganisms are the bulk of life on the Earth, right? Something like 99.99% of life on Earth is microbial. Okay, so if you're going to a very, very distant place from the Earth and look at the Earth, you would see ample evidence for microbial life. You wouldn't see evidence for us. You wouldn't see evidence for plants, right? So evidence for microbial life, like they found in this James Webb Telescope, found in the distant planet, that would be relatively easy to discover. But to discover intelligent life is more difficult, and we've indulged in projects like SETI for about 70 years or something, with null result at the moment, and that is simply because it's very difficult to find evidence for intelligent humans or intelligent creatures that are perhaps superhuman. And for the moment, I think there are many more creatures on other planets that are more intelligent than us. Why do we assume that that we are at the pinnacle of intelligence? I just don't accept that. Yeah, that's the.
Let me explore something you said a little earlier, Chandra, about the pushback of this stuff. You were saying that there may be some hesitancy because of religious beliefs, and that may hold the discovery back. But I don't find modern science to be particularly dogmatic with regard to religion. This generation certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, most of your scientists that are faithful, I find kind of valuable right now because they have a different perspective. Most of the woke, if you will, are, completely non-spiritual. Well, excuse me, I suppose non-organized religion or whatnot. They wouldn't carry dogmas of that type, I wouldn't think. So do you think it's that, or more that the religion has become their science and their sacred scrolls are everything that supports their current belief?
Yeah, I think that the
You
latter
know?
is probably the closer to the truth. But in terms of the history of ideas, the uh,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of spontaneous generation, essentially in the Western culture, in Western tradition, started with who was the guy Aristotle in the 3rd century before the Common Era. Okay, and Aristotle was a highly respected philosopher. He became the most respected Greek or sort of classical philosopher of all time.
Mm-hmm.
The man who contradicted uh, the ideas of Aristotle was inexorable.
Copernicus.
Yeah, yeah, and he was essentially overtaken by Aristotle's stature in terms of his sort of recognition generally. And so anything that Aristotle said was taken as absolute truth by the intelligentsia of
Mm.
the time. And that acceptance of Aristotle, that adoption of Aristotelian philosophy, went all the way through Christendom in Europe throughout the Common Era, and it was accepted by, I think, the Church of Rome in 1300 or something, as the philosophy of the Church of Rome, of the Roman Catholic Church. And Aristotle's philosophy included spontaneous generation as a mode of origin of life, included also the statement that the earth was the center of the world, the center of the universe. And
Mhm.
for making these statements, many people lost their lives. Bruno was burnt at the stake for saying that there is life on other planets, and Galileo was imprisoned, and so on. And so it goes on and on. So there was religious um, authentication or religious
Mm-hmm.
subscription to the ideas of Aristotle. And I think that has continued, not as a religious dogma, but as a deeply entrenched philosophical dogma.
Yeah, received wisdom.
Receive
It's
wisdom.
almost like, yeah, and that it's funny that, and I've thought about this, and you've explained it well in your books, that what they've done, they have this received wisdom, and it is tied back to religion. The received wisdom actually began with a religious nature,
Yeah,
and now you have non-religious scientists, agnostics at best,
yeah,
um, who are kind of still parroting the science of 200 and 300 years ago
yeah. I think so. I
that
think it's
said
a
that
habit.
life had to start here.
Yeah, it's more or less a habit that has been locked into the thinking of people who originally got these ideas from a religious perspective, isn't it? The religion has
Mm-hmm.
gone completely disappeared in most people. I think, as you said, most people are agnostic, but the tradition, the long tradition of a deeply entrenched sort of pseudo-religious, I would still think it's a
Mm-hmm.
pseudo-religious position of life
Mm-hmm.
starting de novo on the earth being the center of our biology. We think ourselves as being so important, humans, and to a lesser extent, all life on the earth is considered to be more important than life anywhere else in the universe, right? And we are still looking for life elsewhere in the universe with some hesitation. We think that it'll be surprising, perhaps, to find people who are more intelligent or creatures who are more intelligent than humans. For a moment, I do not myself subscribe to the belief that we humans are at the pinnacle of intelligence. I think there's got to be in the universe creatures, life forms that are much, much more intelligent than humans. And that's my personal belief. I don't have any facts to justify that. But I would find it very difficult to believe that we humans, at this stage in our evolution, in our progress from bacteria onwards, have arrived at the top of the ladder of intelligence. I think we are probably at the bottom,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
close to the bottom, the way we are behaving generally.
Where does your belief that there could be creatures that are more intelligent than humans come from? Would you say that's comes from a religious perspective? Is it come from a statistical perspective?
No, I think
Where
it
does that
comes from
stem from for
a
you?
logical perspective that if you find yourself as, on a ladder and the ladder is going upwards, and how high up on that ladder are you now? I think the ladder could go up much, much further than the step that we are standing on now. So I think it is, there's no logic that demands us to be at the top of any ladder of intelligence. I think
I
that's
tell you, one thing I find interesting about this and about your work is because vast swaths of American culture are absolutely convinced, for good reason, that there are higher life forms and they're visiting us frequently. And that's never seemed more true than it does literally this week.
yeah,
Each
yeah.
week, it seems more and more credible. But what's interesting is, and I think it's something like 2/3 of the public, when surveyed, believe that they're aliens and whatnot.
Mm,
But
mm,
let's say there's a substantial part of the culture that believes that alien beings will enter your bedroom at night and probe you with tools. Those same people, if you tell them that the space shuttle window has a scum of biology on the outside, they'll look at you like you're a crazy person. So somehow we've developed an acceptance of one thing that may be true, that they're little green men flying around in flying saucers.
mm,
And
mm.
that same crowd, even those call them open-minded people, when you describe your work and some of the other panspermist work that suggests that microbiology is omnipresent, they go, well, no, life can't exist in space. You can't have diatoms in space and
Yeah,
plaugy and
yeah,
plankton and whatnot. They find it to be incredible microbiology, but it's perfectly acceptable to
yeah,
believe that they'll climb in your window at night and probe your anus with a tool.
yeah. It's utterly contradictory. I think there's essentially a deep chasm in people's thoughts between primitive life, okay, maybe, but I mean, intelligent life, maybe it's flying saucers and so on, but primitive life, no. I think that's the problem that we have. I mean, as you said, you mentioned the International Space Station. I have actually collaborated with the principal investigator of the uh, paper that essentially reported the discovery of microorganisms on the outside of the International Space Station.
Dr. Grapinikova, right? Dr. Grapinikova?
Yeah,
Tell
yeah.
us that story, Chandra. That actually threw my panspermia. I remember I was waiting in the pickup line of my son's school to get him after school, and I
Mm,
saw a little blurb that said plankton discovered on window of space station.
mm,
And I knew immediately what had happened. And I said, Chandra has been vindicated. The day is here.
yeah,
Yes, he will live with the accolades of the man who told us the way the world works and
yeah,
whatnot. And then
yeah.
poof, nothing, crickets,
Yeah,
nothing more. Tell us about those studies.
it was suddenly ignored. What I discovered, just essentially from on the internet in the first instance, was that there was this discovery of microbes on the outside of the International Space Station. And then I made in immediate contact with authorities. We sent emails and so on, and got hold of the Grebenevsky, the chief investigator on that, and we exchanged many emails and so on. And I became absolutely convinced that they had discovered these. There was no question that they were supposed to be contaminants, as many of the critics claimed to be saying. So this was a genuine discovery of alien microorganisms going through the it's not even the atmosphere. The International Space Station orbits at 400 kilometers. It's way above the Earth's atmosphere, right? So these were microbes that was essentially falling from the sky, falling from above, from space, from interplanetary space, and landing on the windows of this International Space Station. The Russians believed it. The Americans and the Europeans ignored it totally. They
Mhm.
didn't. They didn't say they were contaminants in the first place, but they totally ignored this. And so it really puzzled me as to why people did not even begin to analyze this material, right? If I was an honest scientist, I would get in touch with the Russians, much as I would not perhaps encourage Russians to go into Ukraine and so on. That's a different matter. Their political behavior and their moral behavior is a different matter. But scientifically, if they report that there was this discovery, I would be very keen to collaborate with them, to talk to them, to get samples of this material, and to check them out. But nothing like that happened. It was just swept under the rug, as it were. And so it was at that point that I began, and a couple of colleagues began to correspond with the chief principal investigator. And we came to the conclusion there was absolutely no doubt that this was an alien microorganism smudge on the outside of the International Space Station at a great height from the Earth. So, I mean, it didn't surprise me or my colleagues, because way back in 2001, we had an experiment that was launched by the Indian Space Research Organization. We collaborated with the Indian Space Research Organization to send to the top of the stratosphere, above 41 kilometers, with sterilized containers, and we used all the modern devices to make sure that these were not contaminants that we brought back. And we brought back microorganisms, or living microorganisms, dead microorganisms, and particles that look like viruses. And we wrote papers about that. And they didn't get very far, because people said these are contaminants. Without any proof, they said that it has to be lofted from the ground and taken to 41 kilometers. All that ISRO did was to recover the stuff that went up from the Earth in rare events, geological events that threw this material above the stratosphere. So that's the kind of rejection, outright rejection, that was prevalent for close to 3 decades for any evidence that we brought to bear on extraterrestrial microorganisms. So there was a deep apprehension of essentially even coming to analyze the data and to make scientific observations and verify or disprove the claims that were being made. They were just ignored, right? And being ignored, I think, is the worst punishment that a scientist can have. And we were ignored for decades, because the results that we got were essentially outside of the remit of conventional thinking. And I still think that it is a kind of religious rejection. As you said, people are not religious anymore, they're agnostic. But there is a deep scientific religion that pervades scientists. And one of the scientific religions that people really adhere to very strongly is that life started on the Earth in a primordial soup.
Yeah.
And that really is very deeply entrenched in our thinking.
And that's the
Chandra,
gap in between little green men who will climb into your window and there being DNA of bacteria out in space. There's the chasm, and because everything started on Earth in this warm little pond, there's no way that it could be out there.
No, it's a massive contradiction. I don't understand that. I think the evidence for alien inputs into the Earth, I think they're getting stronger by the day. I don't like to make any stronger commitment, a stronger statement than that. But with the declassification of all the UFO data that happened, about 6 months ago or so in the United States, there's a lot of stuff there that is very strongly indicative of a continuing connection with the Earth of intelligent life forms.
But there is a lot of evidence that's suggestive, and it's convinced me. But there's definitive evidence that there's plankton on the outside of the space station. So we've discovered extraterrestrial life and put it in test tubes in Russia. right? We have it. And
Yeah.
I'm
And
going to take a little point of personal
yeah.
privilege. Chandra, hold on just a second, and I'll probably inspire even more from you here. If I want to show people these two papers, okay? So here's the first paper that came out in 2018
Mm.
that said what they did was, if I have my numbers right, they're at least close,
Mm.
but 10 times over 6 years,
Mm.
the Russian delegation on the space station took swipes, actually using tampons, and took tampon swipes on spacewalks of the outside window of actually the big viewing window. It's actually the cool window you sit beside when you want to look at the Earth and you're on the space station.
Mm.
And they swiped them. Then, of course, they, protected them and sealed them, brought them back to Earth, studied them, and found that it was littered with plankton and E. coli and snippets of DNA and all of this stuff right on the outside of the window.
Mm.
Now, stay with me here. So then they reached the conclusion, in the conclusions of the papers, and I always recommend the Foxhole people, even if you think that you glaze over on a scientific paper, there's always something anybody can understand in them, so don't fear to read them. But the conclusion is, we detected DNA of bacteria of this genus and that genus in the samples of cosmic dust. And we need to get to that in a minute, how it's in the dust. It was shown that the DNA sequence with one of the bacteria of the genus Microbacteria was genetically similar to that observed in the sea surface in the Barents Sea. Okay, so they're saying, yeah, we found stuff that actually we know where it lives on Earth. So then they say the presence of DNA of wild, land, and marine bacterial genera on the ISS indicates their possible transfer from the stratosphere higher in the ionosphere, which is actually out of the atmosphere, with the ascending branch of global electric current, alternatively to their entry into Earth's environs from space. So they, and hold with me just for a second, Chandra, because I want to compare it to the next paper, and then I want to hear what you have to say. So here are the Russians, all presumably working for the government and whatnot, and have all those intellectual guardrails on them. And they say, well, it came from below, but that would rule out it coming from above, is kind of what they say. But then, so that paper was in 2018. But then, and I'm going to switch papers here, and notice this paper was led by TV Grapenikova. Okay? Stick with me here, folks. So let me just show you that. I'm taking a point of personal privilege here. This is why it's wonderful to have a podcast. May drive people away, but I want to bang this point home. And then I've got a question for you, a favor. So here it is, DNA of bacteria world's oceans. I just read the conclusion. TV Grabenikova said it could have been, probably came from below. But then we switch to the paper that Grabenikova later did, I think about a year later. And the same author who had samples in hand of, I hit the wrong one. Hold on.
Okay.
I'm going to get that one too, but hold on. DNA confirmation of microbial ingress from space. Okay. Then this paper comes out shortly afterward, led by you, your brother, our buddy Ted Steele, the whole panspermia crowd, and then look who's at the end of it. Ms. Grapenikova and 3 Russians. And what does this paper conclude? Okay, so these are 3 of the same authors on the other paper saying, well, we found something really interesting, but we must have come from above. From below. They do a paper with you that absolutely definitively makes the claim that damn right it came from above. Okay, so tell us kind of the sociology of how she moved onto your team. Tell me how that paper was received. I think I know it was ignored. And then tell me why I shouldn't have Ms. Grapenikova come to the Cosmic Summit next summer and speak before your keynote presentation, actually giving that data in public. I've never seen that on YouTube because Ms. Grapenikova discovered life in space.
Yeah, no
That's what
question.
happened.
Yeah, that's no question
Yeah.
about it. And she was
Thank you.
held back, I think, by the Russian, maybe Putin himself, by the Russian authorities, not to emphasize that. And it took me several emails and several telephone calls and so on to convince her that she should really come out with the facts, not the opinions
Really.
of an elite group of scientists that maybe can sort of linked to the Kremlin. So she agreed that this, in terms, if you look at the facts alone, the science alone, the similarity of the bacteria on the space station to the bacteria on the ground does not mean at all that the bacteria on the ground came to the space station. It means, it mean, I think, much more likely that the bacteria in the oceans came from space, right? Because I mean, the connection between stuff on the ground and the stuff coming in on a regular, daily, hourly basis is really, really strong. And even way back in 2001, when we did the experiment with ISRO, and I should also mention that ISRO is not a space organization to trifle with, because they beat the Americans, they beat the Russians, they beat every space agency in the world to be the first to land on the south pole of the moon, isn't it? Recently, it was only months ago. So I mean, they're a very competent organization, and we rounded up together with Fred Hoyle and myself and Milton Wainwright and a few others. We rounded up a powerful team of biologists to be involved in this experiment, right? To send a balloon to 41 kilometers. This is still not as high as the Russian experiment. 45 kilometers is in the stratosphere. And we collected stuff that was falling through the stratosphere from above, not from below. And we found loads and loads of microorganisms, some very similar to or related to organisms on the Earth, but that didn't bother us, because our point of view is that microbes on the ground are related in terms of their species relationships. They're related to stuff that's coming from outside. So this was what we had way back in 2001. We published lots of papers, totally ignored, and the refrain right across the scientific world was that these guys have just picked up stuff that went up from the ground, and they're making a big story of it. But then
Okay, well, Chandra, you know where I'm going to head with this, because
Yeah.
we got them where we want them on this. Okay,
yeah,
so let's make sure everybody understands. You got not even camps, but two different interpretations in only two papers with no follow-ups.
yeah,
One is it came from above. One is it came from below. If it came from below, which would be the more conservative explanation, and it's found at 400 kilometers in space, doesn't that also prove panspermia?
absolutely. It means that
Yeah,
that the Earth is losing material. I think the Earth is
yeah,
connected to the external environment, external interplanetary environment. So if you
yeah.
find, and I bet you the Israel people would find life in the interior of the moon, under the oceans of the South Pole, and those
Yeah,
bacteria would be very similar to bacteria on the Earth, because that's what's happening. The same bacteria are raining on the moon, and they're raining down on the Earth. So this
that's
is
right. So, do you think there would be follow up? That, well, you would hope. I mean, I'm cynical enough now not to expect it. But let's say they had to stick to, well, it had to come from our warm little pond, but now we know that it can escape in some abundance
yeah.
into space. So therefore, we must change the paradigm to admit that any life-bearing planet is transmitting biology to other locations, including ours. But neither of those are understandings now. And there's no refutation of those two options. It's just,
No, no,
intellectual chicanery. It's
no.
just awful.
It's awful. I think science is I would say, at a crossroads between going in the direction of total ignorance, from knowledge to ignorance, or moving upwards to accept panspermia and do exciting things that follow from it. I think it's a dreadful position that we have at the moment, and I don't know how to how it would resolve. You didn't mention the Wretch et al., George. Following on from the Russian discovery, there was a paper by the lead author was Reche, Wretch, I think, I don't know how to pronounce it, and huge, a big team, long list of authors, big team of European, American investigators, and they had a collecting device on the highest mountains of the world. I think it was one of the Alps. I can't remember which mountain, but they
Yeah, I think
had
they were in the Pyrenees. They were in the Pyrenees.
okay. So they had a
Yep.
big sort of bucket or sheet, many square meters or maybe even square miles, I don't know. And they collected stuff that was falling from what is called the inversion layer, right, above the skies. And they brought it back, and they found something like falling down from 20, 30 kilometers. They found something like the equivalent of 2 million tons of, no, sorry, 2 billion individual bacteria falling on the earth, falling on every square meter of the earth in a single day, right? So a huge flood of this stuff is falling on the earth. And of course, the statement that follows that this is stuff that's just lofted above the Earth's atmosphere and coming down. But surely, with the data that's available, and and I've mentioned this in several places, it is certainly possible to distinguish the component that is coming from outside from the component that is coming from the Earth. Right? We need what are called isotopic discriminants. The stuff coming from outside would have an isotope signature, right, of nitrogen, of carbon, and so on, that is different from the isotopes that are around on the Earth, right? There's a
And I
universal.
presume that work is not being done.
No. We try to encourage people to do that, but they don't allow us to use the few instruments that are in either California or in wherever else they have.
What response have you gotten when you asked to use those instruments?
I haven't directly been involved in the attempt to get the instruments. I think Milton Wainwright and a few others have been talking to them, and they said that their calendar is full, and they have projects that are going for the next 100 years or something, and so they can't even dream of doing our project. So you would have thought that this is the most important project in the whole world.
You would think life in space would be an
it?
important thing to
Yeah, I tell
investigate.
you, it is. It's you can't be too cynical about modern science. But Chandra, do you think? And I know you don't have any insight to, you can take a pass on this. But do you think that Grapenikova would speak in public about this if I invited her and paid expenses to the summit?
Yeah, we can try. We can certainly
Yeah.
try. And at the time that we corresponded with her, there was no international sort of condemnation of Russia, right? But we're in a mess now. I think we cannot really deal with Russia in that way anymore. And it's worth a try. I think, why don't you?
What do you mean? Do you think that the Ukraine war would lessen the chances that they would allow someone to go speak? Do they not allow people to travel
Not
to the
the,
U.S.
not the
anymore?
not the Ukraine war, but our attitude
Yeah.
to the Ukraine war, the fact that the United Kingdom, and so on, are on the side of Ukraine and not on the other side, on the Russian side, that's going to irk them. I think that's my
Well,
belief.
but maybe we could. Maybe I'd like to invite her because she deserves the invite, whether she can fulfill it or not, and perhaps she could even video in. But
Yeah,
I'd like to present her as the woman who discovered life in space. That's
yeah,
who she is.
I think so. I think
You
no
were the
question.
one who predicted it would be there, so you were the theorist, and then she was the experimentalist who demonstrated that life does indeed float around space ambiently.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get higher empirically, experimentally than the International Space Station for looking for an external input of life, isn't it? And that's what she found, and it's been the data has been degraded, ignored, and often also condemned and criticized for whatever its implications have been. Any
Absolutely.
You know what's happened?
was
Do you
it?
know what's happened to her in her career since you did the
I don't
second paper with her?
know. I don't know. Maybe she's been executed. Who knows? Sorry, we shouldn't talk in those terms. But I mean, we really don't know what
I
happens to
say
her.
not.
But I
Hopefully
hope
not.
not.
I said, I certainly hope she hasn't. And I'd love to reach out and just, tell her how much I think of their work, if nothing else. And perhaps she can in some way participate in the Cosmic Summit. It'd be cool as hell to have both of you there. But, I failed to note at the beginning that you're going to keynote next year's Cosmic Summit.
You told me that. Yeah, I look forward to that.
That's right. That's right. And that's because you're a dear friend. I love heretical scientists who have been suppressed. I guess
Mm.
it's not like I wish it upon them by any means, but
No, no.
you're the best example I know of. I mean, even now, the Younger Dryas event gets more direct attention and is getting more traction than some aspects of panspermia. That when
Yeah,
panspermia makes gains, it's because the paradigm gets weaker and weaker and more sclerotic, that
yeah,
they get, it's deeper in crisis, and their explanations, like those two papers, are so pained you can see what's going on, but it's not direct progress. So again, I think that you're one of the great figures of the 20th and 21st century who people don't understand yet. So I'm going to be honored to have you keynote at the summit. But here's the thing: people may say, well, gosh, I come to the Cosmic Summit to learn about catastrophes and whatnot. And there
I
is
think,
a catastrophic
yeah,
relationship
yeah,
between your studies and, not like, you're very close to the British catastrophists. Could you tell us why and what is the intersection
yeah,
between those
absolutely.
two studies?
I think the idea that external contributions of material coming in from the Earth coming into the Earth have been catastrophic in various ways. This has been something that I've followed very, very closely over the decades, and my collaborations with people like Bill Napier and Victor Klug
Yep.
in the early 1990s, I think, sort of essentially stresses this point that panspermia is deeply connected with catastrophism, right? Uh,
Yes.
Impacts are very important in the whole history of life on the Earth. If you look at
Yes.
the pattern of life progressing from sort of simple microorganisms 4.2 billion years ago, microbes have remained microbes for billions of years, and then suddenly something happens, and they become multicelled life. And then the most impressive impact-driven event was the Cambrian explosion of life, isn't it? Until the Cambrian
Exactly.
explosion, life was very simple. We wouldn't be talking like this. Wouldn't have any creatures of any significance in terms of intelligence or creativity. And then suddenly we have this huge burst of life emerging on the Earth, and impacts, evidence of impacts. And that's so impacts and external connections have been really crucial in this whole story. And the Younger Dryas, the latest impacts that led to maybe the extinction of the mammoths, isn't it? And the demise of the
Indeed.
A
yeah,
megafauna, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's kind of in death and catastrophe are the seeds of life and evolution.
Ah,
You kind of got a yin and yang thing
yeah,
going on there.
they're connected in a very, very profoundly important and highly relevant manner.
Okay, there's that paper, that wonderful paper. And we're going to put all three of these in the read more section of the post on YouTube.
Okay,
But
okay.
tell us about this great paper, Cause of Cambrian Explosion, Terrestrial or Cosmic, and tell us, where do octopus fit in? I
Well,
guess celopods, isn't that what you call them? Octopi? How do they
yeah,
come into this?
yeah. Well, I think what happened before the Cambrian explosion was that there were creatures that possibly may have in the conventional story evolved into the octopus. What are they? The squid, right? The squid
Mm-hmm.
came before the octopus, but the intelligence associated with the behavior of squid in their environment or any other situation is trivial compared to the intelligence that suddenly emerged with the appearance of the squid. And the appearance of the squid came with the Cambrian explosion. There's no question about it. I think we've looked into this very carefully. So the stuff that impacted the Earth right, and caused some cratering and destruction and so on, also brought the brand new life forms that included, amongst other creatures, the squid. And the squid is sort of stands out as being one of the most remarkable creatures. They have more. They have I think they have a richer genome than a human genome, and so the intelligence of the octopus. Sorry, I said squid. It's wrong. Squid is a primitive, very primitive intelligence compared with the octopus. And the octopus has suddenly emerges with this impact episode that defined the Cambrian explosion of life. So that was the connection that we made in the title of the paper, and we looked at all the evidence that all the sudden changes in the history of life were impact caused rather than slow evolution. Evolution, in the Darwinian sense, is a very slow process of just selecting the best fitting variants or mutants to survive and to thrive and to move forward. But there has to be new information that is injected into this biosystem from time to time. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here where we are. Humans wouldn't be here.
Yeah, it's not a closed system. There are two things operating. It reminds me of uniformitarianism and catastrophism. No one says that erosion and wind and water, of the kind that's happening today, do not mold the earth. Of course they do.
Yeah,
But we add to that as catastrophists that they're dramatic events that occur in a short time. Same thing with evolution. No one is denying Darwinian evolution, but we're saying the leaps are so dramatic and they happen to be combined with extinctions. It suggests that you have a biological change associated with the catastrophic.
Yeah. You're right. No,
so evolution is happening slowly.
Slow and fast.
Slow and fast.
Yeah.
I mean, the impression that
just like geology.
The impression that people are sort of essentially having and criticizing panspermia is that it denies Darwinian evolution. It does not deny Darwinian evolution. It restricts Darwinian evolution to fine-tuning of the phenotypes that exist at any time. And those phenotypes are constantly being replenished by impact events like the Cambrian explosion.
Explain to people what a phenotype is.
Phenotype is the shape and the form and the functioning of a living creature, right? We phenotypes. The lion would be a phenotype, and so on. And they're sort of large groupings of living creatures that have a commonality.
And are you suggesting that the phenotypes are defined from space?
Yep.
And then their Darwinian evolution comes subsequent to that, and obviously does occur. But you're saying lions don't turn into giraffes,
right? Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
There's got to be
presumably there. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be new bits of information that are coming in from the connection between the Earth and the most distant planetary systems, distant living planetary systems. The fact that the Earth and the solar system is doing a huge circuit around the center of the galaxy with a period of some 240 billion years is very relevant in this story, because our solar system is going very close past other planetary systems that might be having life on it, and essentially taking on the living genetic material from very distant sources in the 240 million year circuit of the solar system around the center of the galaxy. So our solar system is not static. It does a huge circuit with a period of some 250 million years, I think it is. And in the course of this circuit, it has close encounters with other, presumably with other planetary systems, like the planetary system or the planet that was recently discovered by the James Webb Telescope. If we pass very close to that system, right? If we pass close to the to the new planet that has this dimethyl sulfide and methane and so on. And if it has living structures, bacteria, viruses, there would be an inevitable transfer of this material to the Earth, and they would contribute then to the further evolution of indigenous life that exists on the Earth.
Hmm.
So I think that's the connection between life on Earth and life in the wider universe has to be regarded as being almost 100% certain now. Astronomy tells you that this is the way the solar system is behaving. It goes as a circuit. It's not static. It has a circuit around the center of the galaxy. It encounters cosmic dust from other exoplanets, which may have life, may have even more intelligent life than life on the Earth. And so that's I think that's the way it's going to go. But I think we have at this stage to discard prejudice of any kind and to accept the facts for what they are. We can't reject facts because they are against our sort of cultural position. I think that's happening.
So you've said, what's being these microorganisms and what has been found in space is not the building blocks of life, but it does seem to contribute to the evolution of life as we know it. What would you call it if it's not the building blocks of life? What are they?
Life itself, genetic units, genetic components of life, right? And whether the alien genetic components sort of merge with our genes of our life on the Earth, is touch and go. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they do match and contribute to further evolution.
Becket, that's a great question, and one that I didn't completely straighten out until I spoke to Dr. Wickramasinghe about a decade or more ago, right? And it was really interesting because I was like, how is this fully formed life out there when you say microbes? And then understand that, yes, it is. Say E. coli, for instance, which is a bacterium that was found on the space station. And then I say, well, my understanding would be that cosmic rays and other, violent characteristics of space would tear apart DNA, et cetera, and something can't live in space on it. Where you got me straight was that these microorganisms are entombed in the cosmic dust. Yeah. And I want you to elaborate, but a little bit of cosmic dust from a comet, and there are tons of this stuff fall on the Earth all day, right? That they're just out there. There are a lot of comets. And then those little pieces are actually visible, for instance, the larger ones. Like, it's pretty big. When you put an E. coli in there, that's like putting an astronaut in a space station that's 700 miles wide. It's a great capsule for that little thing. So they maintain their integrity by virtue of having a sheath, a coating, a capsule of cosmic material, right? And help me straighten that out a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. A micrometer thick coating or crust of material around a microbe would protect the microbe, keeping it viable for billions and billions of years. A microbe inside a comet or inside an asteroid would last essentially for the age of the universe. Nothing would hurt it. So no cosmic rays would reach it, no ultraviolet would reach it, and so on. So these would be deep frozen genetic structures that resulted from some past living system, right? For instance, that the asteroid that was recently in the news was it Bennu, wasn't it? Bennu, I think. Rigel was first.
And Osiris-Rex. Yeah.
And they're claiming that there are building blocks of life in them. It's trash. Building blocks of life are just carbon.
Building block.
And so what they found there is that this is a surface that was once maybe the bottom of a lake, a cometary lake. Okay, and that lake was teeming with biology, right? And the lake has now evaporated or been destroyed. and we are seeing the bottom of this huge extinct cometary lake. And so it's
And just so people know that these things, they're entombed, and then it's just add water, just add warmth, just add oxygen, if that's what it believes on, and then you bring them back like it's, Quaker oats in a bag or something. I mean,
yeah,
you just add warm water, and the life comes back, and
yeah,
that's demonstrated in our little buddy, the tardigrade, which is
yeah,
the iconic example of a tough creature. What
yeah.
happens to a tardigrade? Describe what that is, and what happens to them when you take them to space.
Well, it's a multi-celled. It's quite a complex creature, right? It has legs. It's like a
Hmm.
little. It walks and so on. And when you freeze dry it, it essentially shrivels and sort of goes into a deep freeze, a deep a state of essentially suspended animation, and it can endure the conditions of a space station or conditions of space for, I think it's months and months, and they just come back. If you bring them back, they come back to life. So this is a unique instance of a multi-celled, rather complex living creature going into a deep state of hibernation in under space conditions. Right, there is no requirement, evolutionary requirement, for this process to happen if life is entirely confined to a planet like the Earth. Why should a planet like Earth have this kind of remarkable ability to endure, have life forms that can endure space conditions and develop very, very special, particular strategies to sort of crumble up and remain dormant in a frozen state and then recover. So I think that there's so many pointers to life at the level of microorganisms, at the level of small creatures, even being truly cosmic. I think
So they have put out, they've put experiments, just so folks know that this is empirical stuff. Tardigrades have been taken to space. They have been exposed on plates to the environment in space for months at a time. The plates are brought back in, returned to Earth, just add water, warmth, etc., their habitat, and they come back to life.
Mm,
So, so that shows that that animal somehow, if it evolved here, happened to evolve as a side skill, the ability to survive life in space. And why would you incorporate that into your evolution if you're found in moss on Earth, which is where these things,
mm,
and these things are found all over the Earth. You can find them in Antarctica. You can find them on every single continent in every single condition.
mm.
Tardigrades exist to some degree.
Yeah, yeah.
But why did they develop the ability to live in space? Because they're one of the things that survive well
Mm,
whole when you
mm.
take it to space.
Yeah, yeah.
And did they do those tests because they found them in space initially? What made people conduct those experiments?
They wanted to test what you call extremophiles, right? They've tested a lot of things that we know live in extreme conditions on Earth. So they take those that live in extreme conditions and expose them to space and see what happens. Pretty cool experiments, pretty open minded. But
Mm,
then they don't take the ambitious conclusion. It's always the most timid conclusion that
yeah,
ties back to Aristotelian warm ponds.
yeah,
They
yeah,
just can't break the paradigm.
yeah, yeah. That's the problem. And then they do the right experiments. They have the technology now to do the really most
Yeah.
sophisticated experiments that would once and for all show that we are creatures of the cosmos, that life is a truly cosmic phenomenon. And that is not being done out of fear of shattered, I don't know, shattered ego or whatever. There's a huge resistance to to absolutely proving to everyone's conviction that we are creatures of the cosmos, that life is a truly cosmic phenomenon, that the origin of life is something that happened on a scale that far exceeds the scale of our planet, far exceeds the scale of our planet, the scale of the solar system, the scale of the galaxy, and now perhaps even the scale of the entire universe. I think you cannot leave this discussion without noting that the latest age of the universe has been pushed back in discoveries that were made maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago, using again the James Webb Telescope,
Mhm.
from 13.8 billion years in the Big Bang universe to 30, something like 30.33 naught point.
Yeah.
So
Every
there
2
is,
years that go by, we get an extra 5 billion.
yeah. So
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think the Big Bang is in crisis. And when we have talked recently to the champions of the Big Bang, they are a little sort of red-faced and embarrassed, but they say, let's wait till this data
Mhm.
is recalibrated. And
Mhm.
recalibrated means fudging. Basically, they will eventually do things to the data that will bring it back to 13.8. But already, I think guys like Nalika in India and my colleague Nalika in India, Roger Penrose, who's well into his
Mhm.
80s
Mhm.
in Oxford, he's published a paper saying, and this surely means that the Big Bang universe is totally flawed, fundamentally flawed, and that we should go back to an eternal
Well,
universe.
Chandra, you know where I have to take this, okay?
Yeah.
We need to dance on the grave of the Big Bang Theory in celebration of Fred Hoyle. Because
I,
tell us what he thought of the Big Bang and how it affected his career and the risk that he took with his opinion.
yeah, well, I think he was born into an era where the Big Bang was just coming into fashion, right? Eddington, and in his youth, I think in his teens, Eddington was proposing the Big Bang theory of the universe, and then there were astronomical observations of galaxies, of distant galaxies. A man called Edwin Hubble, about 100 years ago now, I think it's the 100th year of his birth, uh, discovered that galaxies are moving further and further away from us. The more distant the galaxy, it appears to be moving away from us, right? So this discovery of galaxies rushing away from us, it seemed, implied to many astronomers and cosmologists that the whole universe started with the Big Bang, right? If you reverse the speeds of these expansions, you come to a point, and that point then was being more and more so-called rigorously defined. And with all the astronomical observations in the 1940s and 1950s using the biggest telescopes, they came up with an age of the universe at 13.8 billion years, right? So all of the cosmology that was being discussed in the 1940s was the idea that the entire universe started with a sort of gigantic superatom. I know what that means, but it all expanded and
Mhm.
nothing happened. I mean, Fred Hoyle, Bondi, and Thomas Gould.
Mhm.
Fred Hoyle was in England, and Thomas Gould and uh, Thomas Gould was in the United States, isn't it? Bondi,
Yeah,
Bondi,
wonderful guy. He's a good rabbit hole to go down. Abiotic oil and all of his other controversial theories.
yeah, about the carbon in the Earth's crust and so on. That's Tommy Gould. Anyway, these three guys got together and made the statement that if the universe is behaving in this way, it really didn't mean that the universe started with the Big Bang, and the Big Bang was a sort of almost an insult. It was regarded as being it's a denial of the standard point of view. Fred was used as almost as a joke, and it sort of stuck
Mhm.
with the name of the theory. So he challenged this, and he said that there's no hard evidence for the Big Bang, and it may be that the universe was always the way it was, and he had a steady state universe, and right through the time that I was in Cambridge in the 1960s, apart from the work that he started with me on panspermia, on life in the universe, he had to fight this other battle because cosmologists were claiming with great vigor and with great enthusiasm that the Big Bang universe was being proved in various ways. There were new observations from radio telescopes. There were new observations that came from the discovery of the microwave background, which was thought to be a relic of the Big Bang, right? Fred challenged all of these, argued against it. In fact, I got involved in the microwave argument as well. And I said that I've written papers with Fred and others to say that the microwave background says nothing. It could be just what's called the thermalization of starlight, right? if you have dust particles of certain kinds, iron particles, then you could have the starlight being absorbed by these particles and converted into microwaves. So the microwave background may be nothing to do with the Big Bang, and it could be something quite different. So all of these were being discussed and written about in the 1960s, but there was furious antagonism. It was like the resistance to panspermia. It was another cultural obstacle that scientists had to face. Life starting from space was a problem for science, for conventional wisdom, for sort of religious, philosophical constraints that were being brought up against to deny that possibility. Likewise, the start of the universe was also confounded by these obstacles, cultural obstacles, and the Big Bang Theory was very close to the story of creation, of the Judeo-Christian creation. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And we don't admit, or scientists don't admit, that this was the startup of the whole story, but there is a uncanny connection. But now I think with data on the James Webb Telescope, I really predict that within 10 years, cosmologists would have to ditch that theory and go for...
To summarize with Fred, I mean, he was already known as Britain's greatest scientist. He had a weekly program on the BBC. He was ultimately given a knighthood, but it also marginalized him because he never went along with the Big Bang and was a vocal proponent. And the fashionable crowd that that were promoting what was supposed to be new knowledge, they pushed back on Hoyle, didn't they?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think the Big Bang was a really big stumbling block, even in the acceptance of our joint work, right? It was maintained by many people that if this guy can talk about denying the Big Bang, then we don't believe anything that he says about anything else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to take us one more place, and we got a couple of more subjects. We'll try to wrap it up. Are you still game for another 20 minutes, Chandra?
Yeah. Those pictures are interesting. I mean, those little curves with the dots that you see are I think, are the sort of decisive proof that came in the 1980s, early 1980s, the results from experiments in the lab compared with the astronomical data that came from the Anglo-Australian telescope. Now, I think that I didn't tell you this story. I think the way that this sort of discovery happened was that my brother, who was a professor in Australia, was visiting us in Cardiff, and Fred Hoyle was also visiting with me at the time. And we had dinner on one occasion, and Dal, my brother, asked Fred Hoyle, what can we do at the telescope to prove this theory of cosmic life? And then Fred and I came up with this idea. We said that if all of the dust between us on the Earth and the center of the galaxy is biological or biologically derived from bacteria, then it is very important to look at a source of emission of radiation or star or something near the center of the galaxy and see how that light is absorbed as it travels from this very distant place, the center of the galaxy, to the Earth, right? It's like saying that if there's a certain gas in the atmosphere, then if you look at a street light, you should be able to, if you look at the light that is received at the other end, at your end, you should be able to use spectroscopy to tell you what the stuff between us and that street lamp is. In a similar way, they said that we should be able to decide what is between this very distant star and us on the Earth. And we had then set up an experiment, and this is where Mr. Al-Mukti came in the laboratory, to put bacteria under space conditions, freeze dry them, put them in a spectrometer, and obtain the predicted pattern that we would have for light that came through the distance of the center of the galaxy, right? This is thousands and thousands of light years of travel through the dust, and at the end of that, you sort of pick up the signal on the telescope, and you would have, if our theory is right, you would have a certain signature, and that's a signature that came. The points are the astronomical observations that was sent by my brother Dal by fax in those days, right? We didn't have any other device. There were no computers that would link us immediately. So in 1980, the experiment was conducted on the Anglo-Australian telescope, which was one of the biggest telescopes in the world at the time. And so Dal found this set of points, and we had the curve already. Right? That curve was the laboratory curve for bacteria. When you put them together, the agreement was so close that, that really convinced us. He said there's nothing else to do.
Okay. Let me stop you there just for a second, or pause you. Because I remember so well, it was probably 12 or 13 years ago, sitting around playing pajama scientist like I do at got some ungodly hour of the night, probably with 5 or 10 beers in me. And I'm reading this paper. Actually, it may go back 15 years. And I come across this graph. And I understood that there was a theory, a set of theories and understandings that was called Hoyle-Wickramasinghe. And I'd already seen that.
Okay.
And I could never quite get my brain around, like, what do they mean there's life in space? And how do you know that? And these grains are actually, what do you mean they're life? And then I saw this graph. And I remember just being just gobsmacked. I was like, holy cow, is he saying that the light from the center of the gravity happens to match the spectra of light reflected from E. coli, right? So that you were looking at E. coli out there. That's something in space that we think is a bunch of little graphite grains or something inert. And no, it's something that infects you if you get a cut. You know, that's what's out there. And that's what's everywhere here. Everybody has a, trillion viruses and bacteria, and we've got to talk a little virus. But I just want people to think about that graph. What are the odds that the spectrum emitted from an E. coli matches the spectrum emitted from objects in space?
Zilch is the answer. Zero.
Zilch.
Yeah.
So that was the first experimental interpolation of life from space. And then I would consider Grebennikova having been, the tangible life from space, and y'all solved all this. When was this published? 40 years, 45 years ago?
This was 1984 or something. So, pretty close. Yeah. And 2 years, George, 2 years after this curve was published, we had the first observations of a comet from space, which was Halley's Comet, right?
Yeah.
We also had the same guy, my brother, and his colleagues, David Allen, observing that comet, the tail of the comet, using the same telescope, the Anglo-Australian telescope. And he found the same match. There was dust in the comet's tail that matched the spectrum of a bacterium, or spectrum of E. coli. So we published both of these results in so many papers. They got published, but they were essentially scowled at by the establishment. So how can these guys say that there's life outside there as complex as bacteria? And
there's that graph. Chandra, can you see that?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So
you looked at Halley's Comet and it matched bacteria.
Yeah.
And the baseline is the bacteria, is the light spectrum of bacteria that you previously had, and then after looking at the trail from Halley's Comet, those are the points that gave.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at the time that this Halley's Comet was observed using powerful telescopes, using space technology and so on in 1986, that was the first time that comets could be observed in that great depth and to that extent. Before that, comets were thought to be just dirty snowballs, inorganic ice with a bit of rock dust or something thrown in, right? So this was completely shattered by the observations that were made, both using the telescope, these observations, and also from the space observations that were made by the But scientists have not really accepted that they are long-held paradigm of comets being sort of dull, uninteresting objects was instantly shattered. They don't admit that. They sort of essentially, I don't know, they fudge all their history and all their data to maintain that this is just a slight modification of what they already had. So much so, George, that when the Rosetta mission, which went in 2013, was being planned, I was still a professor at Cardiff, and I was part of a team that was involved in some of the planning for the instruments to be put on the lander, right, on this comet 67 CPG or something it's called. And we
Mm-hmm.
had Max Wallace and I had a proposal that Max took to the European Space Agency to say that we should have a very simple experiment, a life detection experiment, and the cost was $8,000 or $10,000, right? A simple life detection experiment. You pour a nutrient onto the surface with a radioactive label and see whether that nutrient is taken up and sort of gases froth out. So this was put to them, but it didn't even get past the first stage. They didn't want to waste $10,000 in $1 million project to prove that life could be on the comet. In the event,
Well, so that opens up this line of questioning, and I want to pivot to viruses here in a moment. But people may ask, well, my gosh, if it's just everywhere, like Dr. Wickramasinghe says, then why haven't we discovered it with our rovers and our space probes? Why haven't we discovered life? And I'll give the short answer, but I want you to elaborate, is because we did, and then we never looked again. And the Levine, what is his name, Gabe Levine or whatnot, the guy who managed the,
yeah,
yeah, Gavin Levine,
Gil
yeah,
Levin,
the fellow who managed the Mars life experiments for the Viking lander just wrote in Scientific American a couple of years ago. He's getting on in years, and he wrote again. He said, we did discover life, but
yeah,
since
absolutely.
then, we have
Yeah.
never directly tested it. There is not one single instrument in space that is designed to detect life, correct?
All the rovers, all the Mars rovers, have deliberately excluded a life detection experiment, just as in the Comet mission.
Yeah,
No life detection. So this is really, really. I mean, it's dishonesty at a level that is almost unimaginable. But
it is.
I knew Gil Levin quite well. He was a personal friend, and I think you probably met him as also George. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but what he said was that he and Patricia Strout, who were the investigators on this Mars life detection mission, they were absolutely convinced the experiment was a 100% success, right? So they poured the nutrient onto the soil. They dug it from maybe a meter under the surface, and the nutrient was taken up, radioactive labeled carbon dioxide or some gas that was the metabolite sort of frothed out. And so they immediately made a press release to say that they detected life on Mars. But then I think the bosses, the big bosses in the establishment said, hold on, we have to explore other possibilities. Could they be
Uh-huh.
contaminant? Could the various things be explained otherwise? And what they tried to do was to say that there is no evidence of any organic material around the landing site. Right? They had an experiment, a chemical experiment, look for landing organics, and if there are no organics, then there is no life. That's what they maintain. So they said, hold back, we haven't discovered life. We've got to look at this
Mm.
much carefully. So that's where it stood. And Gil Levin and Patricia Stott were furious. In the decades that followed, ample evidence has accumulated for life on Mars. We had a mission, European space mission, to look for methane in the atmosphere of Mars. Methane was found. Methane is almost certainly a biological product, right? And it was seasonal. Methane was found in the summer, and in the winter it went down. So every possible signature, indirect signature of biology was found, but still we are holding back. So I think we have come to a situation where the truth, if it is unpalatable or inconsistent with previous beliefs, are essentially held back. We deny the truth.
Mm. As Gil Levin says here, inexplicably, over the 43 years since Viking, none of NASA's subsequent Mars landers has carried a life detection instrument to follow up on these exciting results. And it's just unbelievable. And that's where it gets to the building blocks of life thing. My God, there must be an article a week that discusses looking for the building blocks of life. So they put the instrumentation on there that can characterize organic chemicals, but
Yes.
they don't go ahead and see whether it's alive or could be alive with a little bit of warm water.
Yeah, because that's not part of their story.
For 43 years.
Their story
Yeah.
is spontaneous generation, miracles everywhere.
Yeah, and why they don't do that, and it's funny, every time you see, I would imagine most of the time, we detected the building blocks of life here or there. It seems like the moon, Euclideus or whatever, has the building blocks of life. It could just as very well be life itself in a desiccated, entombed, freeze-dried manner, that it's not the building block. You're actually seeing the freaking little piece of plankton.
Yeah, and the detritus of life.
And the detritus.
Yeah.
I think
it's likely that if there are the building blocks of life there, that there's life there as well.
Yeah,
if they were to look for it.
God, but I think it's so frustrating.
George, I think the general public interpret the building blocks of life as the discovery of life, because so many people have come up to me and said, "You must be very pleased that these Americans or South found the building blocks of life, and they think that building blocks of life equals life. Far from it."
Yeah. Exactly. What they're saying is, we have discovered that there are large masonry stones out there. And you're saying, no, there's actually a freaking cathedral. Yes, it's made up of masonry, but it's a cathedral. It's not just random little bits lying around that God needs to put together and make life. It already happened.
Yeah. I think what they deny is intelligence. Intelligence that is outside of the earth is not permitted in modern thinking. We are
okay. That's right. Okay, well, let's wrap up, and this might take a minute because we've got to turn to some really heretical science, okay? We got to really step out of the comfort zone that we've been in so far and discuss. We are deep in the foxhole. The foxes and rabbits have, in fact, turned around and gone back to the surface and said, good luck, gentlemen. Okay, we're deep in the hole. And Chandra, explain the role of viruses in panspermia and the role of panspermic viruses in disease as well as evolution.
I think they have a crucial role to play in both of those. In evolution, certainly, in diseases. In evolution, the role of viruses is that viruses are the transporters, very ready transporters of new body plans, new genetic information that can go from one creature to another. And I don't mean one creature on the earth to another, maybe one life form on one planet to a very distant life system on another planet. And this is, I think, now proved to be almost a certainty in terms of physics and astronomy, because we know that as I said earlier, that the Earth and our planetary system, there's a huge circuit around the galaxy. And in the course of that circuit, it picks up the detritus, the ejecta from many other living planets, right? And those living planets, I'm presuming that they're living planets. And those planets would have bacteria and viruses, and like the stuff that Grebenova have seen, they would be leaving some of this stuff would be leaving these planets, and then we would be intercepting those viruses, right? So life information from. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah. So live information from.
Take your time. Take your time.
Okay.
Informal podcast.
I would just want to kind of. Sorry, you can edit that, I presume. I hope. Okay.
Maybe so.
No
Maybe so.
editing.
Please continue. Yeah.
Okay. So the transference of genetic information in the form of viruses coming from one living system to a very distant living system, the planetary system that is maybe hundreds of light years or thousands of light years away, is one role that the viruses play. They are the vectors of evolutionary change, evolutionary transfer of information, right? And the other is the role that they play in causing diseases and in plants and animals, and that has been known on the earth and well recorded for thousands of years, and this we know that for sure. In the last, I don't want to talk about the COVID pandemic; it's too fraught with politics.
Well,
And
listen, I'll cut short to that because both of us were of the mind that, in our whole team, and we actually published a couple of papers on it, right?
yeah,
You published one
yeah, we did. Yeah.
suggesting that yes, and we'll run right through this because in my view, we were probably wrong that
No,
COVID could have come from space. I still believe it could have, but I do believe personally that it came from the lab. But I believe that coronaviruses originally come from space and that the
yeah,
1918 pandemic was from space.
yeah.
Please.
1980 pandemic could not have come from a lab because the labs didn't exist at the time. There was no lab that could have manufactured a influenza virus and put it in the stratosphere and distribute it in the way that this epidemic spread around the world. The first outbreaks of a lethal strain of that pandemic virus, happened in Boston, United States, and in Bombay, India, on the same day in 1918. Right? In 1918, there was no air travel. To go from India to the United States would have taken you 3 months.
They were still taking that steamship that you took to England.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, maybe 3 times that length of time. So there was no human transport, right? And
Right.
I have studies in a book, Diseases from Space. I think that has to be advertised.
So, fantastic book.
Yeah. I think I still stand by almost every word in that book. I mean, the evidence from all of the data from the U.S. Congress hearings and so on that we looked at in really great depth, this virus could not have been primarily spread by person-to-person infection. We found that in the depths of Alaska, where there was no human travel, the human travel was so difficult that people had to use dog sledges to go hundreds of miles. Outbreaks occurred at the same time as in the neighboring cities, which were maybe 500 miles away. So there were things like that happened right across the entire planet. Ships at sea, and as you were talking about going in ships, and people used to travel very frequently from England to Australia. Right, England was the hub of the empire. Australia was part of the empire, and so on. So there was a lot of traffic and a lot of ships flying between London, between ports in England and in Australia. And on several occasions, it's well documented that maybe a month. It took me 3 weeks or a couple of weeks to go from Ceylon to England, but in those days, it probably would have taken a 2-month journey to go from UK to Australia, right? So these guys, passengers go, they're perfectly fit, no evidence of any sniffing or colds or flu. And a month or two later, in mid-ocean, the whole ship comes down with this flu, with the 1918-1919 pandemic, right? And there are well-attested stories like that right across the board. And how do you explain it?
Tell us about your experiment or investigation into the boarding schools and how the viruses spread in the boarding schools in England. Tell us that story.
Yeah, that was another interesting sideline, if you like to call it, of our theory. Because in 1977, we hadn't really quite gone to the stage of saying yes, life is definitely cosmic. We thought that it's likely that life is cosmic. We didn't have that beautiful spectrum, the correspondence points and observations and so on at the time. But we were sort of homing in on the theory that life is truly cosmic, right? And that diseases essentially also are driven from outside. And we had analyzed the 1918-1919 pandemic in great detail and came to that conclusion. So in the late 1970s, there was a new subtype, it is called, of the influenza virus that was raging in the Soviet Union to begin with, in Russia. Okay, and for that reason it was called the red flu, because the Soviets were red at the time in our reckoning.
Mm-hmm.
So the red flu was zipping around the world, and it was making school children in England and Wales sick. But this same brand of flu had not been seen or known for at least, I think, 30 years or something. So Fred Hoyle and I were discussing influenza coming from space. We had lots of telephone conversations about this and so on, because he was living in Lake District, I was living in Cardiff at the time. And we said, why not use the school children as detectors of the virus and see how the cases of the red flu would be distributed when the flu comes to England. We were confident that it would come to England. It did come to England within a week or two of the Russian outbreaks. Right, so school after school was going down with this, and some of them were boarding schools. So we went to many of these schools. Eton was a very famous school. We went to Eton and got their data when the kids went down in different places, different houses. And what we found there was really quite stunning. We found that the incidence of the influenza at a countrywide level across England and Wales was very patchy, right? It was almost as though sort of patches of cloud fell in different areas.
I believe
And
the term you used was higgledy-piggledy.
higgledy-piggledy, right? And
Higgledy-piggledy.
it was higgledy-piggledy at several levels. At the level of sort of big conurbations, and at the level of boarding house rooms where the kids were sleeping in Eton and places like that, right? So there was a huge heterogeneity, and the kids who were getting these with the data that we got, they were mixing in the playing field, they were mixing in the classroom, but it was in their sleeping accommodation that the differences showed up, right? So they were affected by something that fell on their boarding houses, entered their dormitories and so on. And so we had a lot of interesting statistics that we did. I think you probably had some of these curves. There was no evidence of person-to-person spread. I mean, the medics were angry because we made those statements. They thought we were now, from life in space, we were really going mad. But nevertheless, this is what the facts showed us, that there was very little evidence of person-to-person spread. And as I told you, school children of the age that we looked at, 10, 11, 15, they were like detectors of a new virus, because they hadn't encountered that virus in their lifetimes. So they all had equal immunity or lack of immunity. So this was we thought it was a good experiment. It was fun. It was amusing. I don't know how much credence we attached to the final result, but
well, that was back in the good old days when you had a global flu and they didn't lock the entire planet into their homes for.
Yeah.
My God. Just let people cough and sneeze and let's go about our human duty.
Yeah, that's how that's happened. That's what should have happened.
Yeah.
That's my.
What else? I don't want to miss any. There's so many. I think we've hit some of the beautiful nuggets of your work, the things that each of them are empirically proven and unrefuted. No one has come out and opposed your paper about the discovery of the space station. They just ignore you.
They ignore it. and they don't. If they say they disagree with our conclusions, they don't give any reasons for disagreeing, which is also a very interesting phenomenon.
Astrobiology is the most timid discipline in all of science. It works against its own purported mission. And frankly, astrobiologists as a group are a bunch of wussies.
I think so.
Okay?
And I should tell you, George, I think I told you already in a different context, the word when we were finding connections between astronomy, astronomical phenomena, and biological phenomena, right, whether it be genetics or influence or what, we decided, and we wrote papers about it in journal of lots of highly reputed journals, that there's a new scientific discipline emerging. And we essentially proposed the term astrobiology and wondered whether astronomy would swallow up biology or biology would swallow up astronomy. But we thought, no, neither would happen, and there would be a new discipline called astrobiology.
Mm-hmm.
No one gives us credit for that. No
one.
And we started the first international center for astrobiology in Cardiff. But we didn't get any money for it, right? And no one was supporting us. The government didn't give us money, so it had to be closed. But the first center for astrobiology was started by me and Fred Hoyle.
Well, I've got to bring up a name that, troubles us both. And it's funny because a lot of our fellow travelers in the heretical science field, celebrate the man. And I can kind of see how, you read the press releases and see how he positions himself. You could think that Avi Loeb is a contributor to this discipline. But no, Avi Loeb has written paper after paper after paper, creeping up on what you and Hoyle proved 50 years ago.
Yeah, no reference to
it. It does not cite or credit you as a general matter.
Yeah. No, I mean that's a common phenomenon. I think more than common now. I don't know why that happens, but I think it's a combination of cultural.
Because Avi Loeb is a schmuck who doesn't give proper credit to his predecessors, and that's the worst thing you can do in science. Because he's just sweeping up 15-year-old science and dribbling it out now without making the extraordinary conclusions. I'm sure he believes everything we've just said, right? But he's too timid. So he goes out and does stuff like, look for interstellar objects in the ocean and stuff, where he could probably get Elon Musk's attention and get one of his spacecraft swiped. But nope.
No, I think that's a fairly common tendency. It irked me at the beginning. It irked Fred Hoyle and me at the beginning to find ourselves completely ignored by people who were ostensibly in positions of power. But then we decided that if you're deemed and called and people decide that you're a pariah, then this is the fate that you have to endure. Every dissenter from mainstream science has suffered similar punishments in the past. Aristotle.
Chandra, you will not be ignored at the Cosmic Summit. Your life and your contributions will be celebrated by hundreds of people on June 15th and 16th, 2024. We're going to have a great time. Look forward to meeting your wife. We'll have you a hotel room. We're going to fly you over.
Okay.
And we're going to introduce you to a bunch of people who are going to love hearing your studies and take them at face value instead of with prejudice.
Yeah. No, I don't.
Because
I don't expect people to believe what I say. I think people should take note of arguments and to try to assess these new data and new perspectives independently, isn't it? I mean, to ignore it or to attribute it to other people, that's even worse, is something that we should not encourage.
Well, just on that note, I wanted to just announce, I probably showed at the beginning, we've got some new speakers we're adding to the roster this year, and there are going to be more coming, and some of them quite notable names. But I know a lot of people are big Hugh Newman fans from Megalithomania, which I'm going to actually attend in London next week, or in Wiltshire, west of London. Hugh puts that on every year, and he's going to come speak at the Cosmic Summit. I just met with Bob Grenier of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, and he's going to be presenting on advanced power technologies, if you will, and cold fusion. Yeah, and then this is just for the audience too, but you should know too, Chandra. And then Brad Young, who is on the Cosmographia podcast, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation. He hadn't done a lot of public presenting in front of big crowds, but he needs to, because I've heard that he gives an absolutely fantastic talk. So we got Brad from Cosmographia, running buddy of Randall Carlson's. And then we're bringing in Alex Dunn and Nick Sierra, who are the primary researchers of the pre-dynastic Egyptian vases. And then, as we know, Ben Van Kerkwyk of Uncharted X will be returning, and he is the communicator of the findings of Alex Dunn and Nick. So Alex and Nick are going to come and give their results, which there should be quite a bit of new data on the vases by June. They're going to give new results, and then Ben is going to tell us about some other things, right? So we'll be pivoting him away from the vases as he wants to do, and he's going to have a different subject set. But Alex and Nick will be speaking to the vases. So that's 5 new speakers: Hugh Newman, Bob Grenier, Brad Young, Alex Dunn, and Nick Sierra. And then we've got some terrific invites out there. One of them a big name. I know everybody like to come, and that's Mr. Robert Schock. And I have invited him, and he is looking over his schedule and talking to his wife, and we're months out, but he seemed kind of partial to coming, but I don't have the yes yet. So I don't mean to prematurely commit him, but if anybody wants to go on Twitter and say, "Hey, Robert, please come to the summit. We love you." Please do. And people may say, well, he's a sun guy. He believes that emissions from the sun calls the younger tribes. Well, that's fine. We're at the summit. We can disagree agreeably. That's okay. That's our kind of thing, man. As long as he admits there's a catastrophe, he's our kind of guy. Yeah, Chandra, what you got, buddy?
Have you thought of Robert Temple?
I have thought of Robert Temple. What I want to do is make a run at I have thought of Robert Temple. In fact, I mentioned it last night in an email. And I'll be seeing Robert at Megalithomania next week in London. Right? So I'm going to talk to Robert and see if he can come and give an introductory panspermia 101 and get y'all's history and proof out. So, so that you don't have to do all the one work, and then you will give a keynote, which will be a high level, Robert
Temple is good.
Cosmic.
He's got a very, very good perspective of things, and he primarily not. I don't think he was trained as a scientist, but he has had lots of contacts with the top scientists, including Fred, myself, Paul Dirac, and so on. So he's also a historian and a sinologist, isn't it? He spent a lot of time with who's a guy in China.
No, he's a Swiss Army knife of exciting, cutting edge science. Robert's great, and also I found a little similarities kind of between his subject set and mine, because we both address Egypt catastrophes and panspermia. So he's my kind of guy. Hey, Becket, thank you for joining us, buddy. Very much appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I always am learning a lot listening to these, especially from you, Chandra. So thank you for entertaining my novice questions.
No, we're good. This is a good foxhole, man. We got 2 hours in the hole. People are going to love it. Chandra, go check out the comments. I'll send them to you in a couple of days on YouTube, because we've had some very, very nice people in the comments section. And I know they're going to be fired up to see you at the Cosmic Summit and hear more from you in the meantime. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Over and out for Foxhole number 4. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.